I'm Rick Stevens. This is the Parkinson Network of Mount Diablo, and we have a monthly lecture series that we call Lunch and Learn.
Sounds good. Hello, everybody. So my name is Bryan Riddle. I am what's called a placement specialist. My company is called Care Placement Advisors. I have worked in the senior care industry for approximately 9 years, and I serve the Contra Costa and Alameda counties for the most part, and I do some up in Solano County as well. This presentation it's going to be kind of high level and talking about a variety of different topics. And when I say that and why I'm saying that is because I won't necessarily be doing a deep dive because there's a lot of information for each topic to actually cover. So what I want you to do, I invite you, we'll have a Q&A session towards the end, but the last slide is going to have my phone number and my email address. Sometimes we don't want to ask questions on Zooms for whatever reason. So it's okay at any point in time to reach out to me directly, okay? I do this presentation quite a bit at senior centers. I recently did it in Rossmore for about 60 of their residents a few weeks ago. So we'll jump in. And I think, Rick, if I'm correct, we're going to probably do just questions towards the end. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But if people have questions during the process, please put them in the chat. And that way we'll be sure to get to your points. Okay, take it away, Bryan.
All right, I'm going to do the share screen right now. Then I need to get this away. Hold on here, guys. Slideshow. All right, here we go. Okay. So these are just some statistics. 85% of Americans, our goal is to age in place, and that's good. And towards, as we age, sometimes that actually shifts for a variety of reasons. All right. So initially, what happens is home care. So typically, what we see is most people try to age in place and help out with activities of daily living, right? Should things become a little bit more challenging or difficult. So some of those items may be bathing, toileting, grooming, maybe even transportation, meal preparation, or light house cleaning. Home care is a great option, but there's just a few things that you're going to want to know about it in order to protect yourself, essentially. So, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of struggling to navigate this right now. Home care, how is it paid for? Let's talk about that first, because it can be extremely expensive. So it's a private pay item, so out of pocket. The other ways that it can be covered is through long-term care insurance. It seems that most people don't actually have it. I mean, the cost of long-term care insurance was and still is pretty expensive. Some people do a reverse mortgage on their home. If we were having this conversation maybe 20 years ago, it wouldn't shed the most positive light on doing that. Reverse mortgages have come a long ways, and they are definitely worth investigating, and that money can be used for care in your home. A lot of people are unaware that there is a program offered through the Veterans Affairs called Aid and Attendance. You would go directly to the VA in your county and you mention aid and attendance and the eligibility, and they can start and help you walk through that process in order to get qualified. It's not going to cover all of your home care expenses or maybe even all of your assisted living expenses, but you could get a portion of money which can help you. An example would be my dad's a veteran. My mom needed home care. She had Parkinson's. And I think we received approximately $1,600 a month for her. My dad actually has Parkinson's, and we receive, I believe, approximately $2,000 a month for him. So home care is extremely expensive. So what do you do if you can't afford it? Each county has a program called in-home supportive services. It's based on income eligibility, and you have to contact them, and they pretty much dictate how many hours of care you would actually get per week. Okay. So here's what's interesting about home care. And this is why I like to have this conversation with people. A lot of people initially think, hey, I'm just going to hire a private caregiver. It's less expensive. My friends used them before and they had good success. And I'm not here to tell you that they don't work, because in many instances they do. But what you want to know is what they don't do and things you need to think about when they're not around. You become technically their employer when you have them in your home. So you're technically supposed to give them a W-2 at the end of the year. You are required to pay overtime hours. If you don't, they can back sue you and they win. But you are literally their employer. Um, the one thing I tell my families to think about is, let's say that you do have just one caregiver coming in. What is the backup plan if that person goes on vacation? Who's going to be overseeing your care at that point? So it's just something to really think about. Okay. Those are relatively affordable. Sometimes you can get them for $20 a month, maybe $25 per month. And some are very skilled. So again, I'm not here, I'm just here to educate you on that. If they fall, they hurt themselves in your homeowner's insurance policy does not cover anything. You would need to get a separate umbrella policy to cover workers' comp expenses. Okay. Then you go to the other end of the spectrum, and we have what's called a home care organization. And what that means, it's a company or an agency that does all of the work behind the scenes. So their caregivers have had a criminal background check. They can drive. They take care of all the liability insurance. They do everything. If there's a caregiver that calls off, you call the office and they will do their best to get one there as soon as they possibly can. They do educate the caregivers on how to do different level of care. So maybe, how would we do a two-person assist if another person were there? Or how would we utilize a Hoyer, a device to pick the person up from out of bed and into a wheelchair, for example? So you're getting different level of care. However, it's definitely a lot more expensive. And in our counties, it can range from maybe $36 per hour, and it could go as high as maybe $44 to $46 per hour. What they're looking at is the level of care. So do you require total care with all activities of daily living, the bathing, toileting, grooming, or are you relatively light care on the spectrum? Okay. So that's a little bit about home care, which I want you to be careful about. The next thing is called home health. Home health is a benefit that's actually covered by Medicare. And, this is what we think of when people maybe fall, they break a hip, they go to the hospital, and then they go to a rehab center for physical therapy, occupational therapy, or speech therapy. But what a lot of people don't know is you can actually get that in the home as well. So let's say that you're starting to have some mobility issues. Maybe we're shuffling a little bit more, or maybe we're having some swallowing issues. You can call your doctor and see if they could have a speech therapist come out, or a physical therapist, or an occupational therapist to work with you to see if they can't improve your situation. What I tell my families is, if you have home care, which we just spoke about, in place while doing this, when these folks come out, physical therapy and occupational therapy, they leave behind little tear sheets with the exercises that you should continue doing in the home. But I encourage the families and the caregivers to do the exercises as much as possible, because it really does help. Okay. Here, all right. So this is kind of my background of what I do currently. My main role is when maybe the cost of home care becomes too expensive, or maybe someone wants more socialization, or maybe just their care becomes so high that they really want to move into a different type of environment for different reasons. So I help people find assisted living communities, independent living communities, and what we call board and cares, and memory cares. And we'll talk about board and cares in a second. Some people know what they are, some people don't. I'm a local person, right? So I have physically set foot in these communities. I do not refer to places I have never walked in, interviewed people. We're looking at the citations and violations of the different communities constantly. Just because a community looks pretty, it doesn't mean that right now they're doing a good job. We are having a huge caregiver shortage. So different referral agents who are local, we can kind of tell you how they're doing the staffing, for example, or the level of care that they can actually manage, meaning a lot of people think that when they pass an assisted living community that they all do the exact same thing, but they don't. So they're licensed accordingly. So as an example, most of our communities are not licensed to administer insulin for folks who are diabetic. So you might want to know that in case you're at one of the communities that doesn't, because you don't want to have to move again, right? You don't want to start that process. So you really want to identify local referral agents, placement specialists like myself. The other goal is you want them to come in and meet you and do an assessment. I'm not just looking at your care needs. I want to learn about you. What's important to you? What type of socialization are you drawn to? We need to talk about the location, and then we need to talk about the budget. So the challenge is, if you see right here, what to avoid, most people's instinct is to go online. I'm guilty of it too. And they do a search and they come up with the place for mom, caring.com or care.com. There's several of them out there. So what you want to know about those places is two things. They've never even set foot in the communities that they're recommending to you. They don't know their citations. They do not know their violations. They do not know the level of care that they're licensed to actually manage. The second thing that you're going to want to know is once you put your contact information with those accounts, local people who actually have been in these places and know what they do and what they don't do, we can't help you at that point. These places have a contract with all the communities, and it locks you into them. And it's not uncommon for these search engine companies to send out your information to maybe 10 up to 20 different communities at a time. From there, what's going to happen? You're going to get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails, and they aren't going to stop. And even if you tell them do not call, a lot of the time they actually keep calling. Um, Board and cares are residential homes in most of our neighborhoods. They're licensed like assisted living. So you drive past these places all the time and you probably don't know that, but they're different. So they're licensed to accept typically 6 residents in the home. There are 2 caregivers during the day, and then there's 1 person at night. So they do high level of care when someone really needs supervision constantly. Maybe they need help toileting frequently at nighttime, whatever it is. But they do total care towards end of life as well. They do hospice care. But just like the big assisted living communities or memory cares, just because there's one in your neighborhood and it's this great neighborhood, it doesn't make it a great home. So again, you have to look at our licensing, citations, violations with the Department of Social Services to actually know what's going on with those. The last one here, I'm not going to hit too much on, but it's called a continuing care community. There's a huge, huge buy-in to get into these places. They take a big chunk of your money, and then if you pass away or were to leave, you only get a percentage of it back. So essentially, they're taking your money to make money off of your money. The other communities that we just talked about, independent, assisted living, and the memory cares, they're the same. This just has a skilled nursing facility attached to it. If you even have to go to one, which you might not have to, the average length of stay at a skilled nursing is 10 days. So it's probably best not to hand over $500,000 or $1 million to buy into a community, but that's just my opinion. Okay. Care management. This is something that is really important, and I don't feel that enough people are aware of it. A care manager could be a social worker, maybe a licensed social worker, or a nurse. You can become certified to become a care manager. So any of you or I could actually do that. This would be a good situation where, let's say, you have family out of state, but you really need help with someone maybe navigating your doctor appointments, going with you to the doctor appointments to gather the information, and then maybe jump on a call with the family to say, hey, here's what's going on. Here are our options. They're really good to engage when you have a private caregiver coming into your home. They come in and they can just kind of do an assessment, make sure that there's things are going smoothly and that there are not any problems or concerns. They can make sure that you're paying your bills on time. There's just a lot of different things they can do. They literally can navigate your entire life in the home. I mean, right down to getting a painter or helping you get a new roof. But they're instrumental in taking care of people and making sure that they're okay. But they give all different types of resources. So the care managers, they'll refer to people like me, for example, or different home care companies, or maybe a fiduciary as an example. Um, that would be the type of thing, you'd want to go through myself or maybe City Serve in Pleasanton, or contact Rossmore, their counseling services, to find out different names of care managers. But I have some really, really great ones that I could, recommend. So end of life, it's kind of an interesting slide where people are like, okay, it's kind of a dark topic to talk about. Hospice is engaged too late in the process. The average length of stay for a patient on hospice, I believe, is about 5 days. Um, Hospice does not mean that the person, our loved one, is going to pass away. You can actually graduate off of hospice. You actually have to get recertified every 90 days to continue being on hospice. Okay. Um, so just like aging in place, 80% of us, that's our goal, is to remain in our home until we pass away. Hospice can happen anywhere. I mean, assisted living, boarding care, skilled nursing. So wherever you are, the hospice agency will go to your home. It's a 24/7 service, so you always have access to a nurse should there be a change in condition. It's about quality of life, medications. Yeah. So here's some of the requirements, that we see in order to be eligible for it. I'm going to move this. This says 6 months or less. And so, yes, technically, that's what they think could be the outcome. But recently, as an example, I had someone in Pleasant Hill that we transitioned into a boarding care. The person was total care. And the boarding care, the caregivers were just brilliant. And they started this person off with a nice pureed diet to start slowly get intake. But 2 weeks ago, he actually graduated off of hospice and he actually moved back into Rossmore. Um, so I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, but I'm saying people are afraid of it. But it's a great way to have medications changed on the fly in your home should you be experiencing pain. If you don't want to keep going back and forth, to the hospital, it's a great way to have a nurse come into your home. So you're avoiding doing all of that. Here are just some little things that, you may want to contact hospice if these things are continuing. They're pretty straightforward. Caregiver burnout, a little bit of a change of topic, but here's what I'm going to share with you guys. I mean, here are some of the things, right? Depression, you're withdrawing from people. Um, those are very normal things. People people don't engage the services around them to give themselves respite, to give themselves a break. And there's a statistic out there that 60%, it's actually a little bit higher, but 60% of the people caring for the person who needs the care will actually pass away first. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's mental, emotional, and there's the physical stress that goes with caring for somebody. I'll use my dad as an example. Um, he was at my mom's side for the entire journey with her Parkinson's, and towards end of life, for her it got difficult. But he's kind of a type A personality, and that he wanted the caregivers to do things a certain way. So he was always there, always wanting to be in control, which was great. However, two things went wrong in this scenario. He would never go take a break, not even for 4 hours. I mean, we had to force him out of the house basically to go get a haircut. So that wasn't good. He just wasn't sleeping well. My mom was up a lot at nighttime, but he was just trying to be the superhero, right? The husband. The second thing we did incorrectly, well, he was resistant to, is I was hoping to engage hospice about 4 months before he ended up doing it. But for my dad, he's like, oh my gosh, that means we're going to die. My mom was actually in hospice for 15 months. But what he didn't know is that with the hospice companies, they bring in an aide, and that aide comes in and they can help with bathing in the morning. They provide a little bit of care. But for 4 months, my dad was still doing the bathing in the morning, and he didn't know that he didn't have to do it. So what happened is when my mom passed away, um, my dad looked great during the entire journey. He did a good job. But as soon as she did pass away, we just saw this huge decline, and it happened very, very quickly. He started losing weight. He was always kind of tired. Um, it was just from caring for my mother. And he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't have to do it. But just wanted to let you know, like it is real, caregiver burnout. And it really does kill you. It truly does. So here's some things that we recommend our families do. Um, get away, hire a home care company or a friend, have them come over, go out to lunch, try to play golf, just have people over to spend time with support groups. You guys are clearly doing that. Adult daycare facilities, a lot of people don't know that they exist. But it's a nice way to have your loved one go and do some hobbies, some activities, give them some stimulation, but it actually gives you a break. And then you know that they're actually in good hands with some other people. But again, don't be afraid to engage home care. It is a good way to help you. It is expensive, so you're going to have to balance out your happy medium with that. Okay. So that is pretty much what I wanted to cover today. I probably blew through a lot of things relatively quickly. This is my agency. We're based in Walnut Creek. That's my phone number and that's my email address. You can check out our website as well. Our agency has been around. I worked with a woman who had done it for approximately 20 years. So we're the second oldest referral agency in Contra Costa County. We're one of 3 agencies that Rossmore uses, which we're really proud of. I ended up starting my own agency 3.5 years ago. And then when Jan went to sell hers, I actually ended up purchasing her company. And she still gets referrals, so we still talk a little bit, but she is slowly starting to kind of phase out right now. And I'm deciding if I'm going to bring on maybe a care manager or a nurse to work with me as the business continues to grow. 40% of our business right now is word of mouth. A lot of our referrals come from hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, judiciaries, case managers, care managers, and then, of course, word of mouth. So, Rick, with that, if we want to open it up for questions.
Okay, well, let's start with the first one.
Okay.
Um, why don't you, we're going to ask you to go back to certain slides. So
Okay.
perhaps keep the slide sharing up.
Okay.
First question that was put in the chat was, can you go back to the slide about the signs needed for hospice care
Sure.
and talk about that a bit more?
Mhm. Um, I'm wondering if it's this one. The things that we see the most with hospice is the conversation comes up a lot when people are constantly going back and forth to the emergency department. And they can't really figure out exactly what's going on, where there's constantly a change of condition. Poor appetite is always a huge one, right? We're noticing the loved one not eating as much food, and then we're seeing the weight loss that is associated with it as well. Um, the breathing, that's something that we commonly see. If someone's bedbound, and let's say they have a cancer diagnosis, but they're really struggling to ambulate, um, and it's struggling just to move in general, that's when we will see hospice engaged. Pain, severe pain, that they can't get under control. Sometimes we'll see hospice engaged for that as well, because if you recall what I said earlier, they can change medications fast within hours. So pain management sometimes is better with hospice than it is waiting to contact your doctor, waiting to get a phone call back, and then actually getting the prescription. But, hospice goes with dementia, Parkinson's, cancer, stroke, everything and anything, right? But it is the type of thing that you have to have two doctors say that you are eligible for it. If you aren't eligible, you can just stay in communication with your doctor. But like I said, it's not a death sentence. It's people graduate off of hospice. And for those who maybe it is a terminal thing and maybe they won't be with us in the near future, it truly does give quality end of life, not just to the patient, but to the family members as well, because they have a care team, social workers, nurses, doctors overseeing the care of that person. So I think it gives a lot of reassurance to the family in cases like this. Okay.
Can you comment a bit more about the specific role of care managers? So,
Um, Let me see here. Care managers are basically just like a family member. If you notice here on top, it's kind of like a professional relative is the term that we use. They coordinate. They can pretty much drive and help you with any decision in your life. They can't be signing your checks or anything like that, but they can be monitoring your mail coming in, making sure your bills are paid, making sure that you're getting to and from your doctor appointments, whether they escort you there or they arrange for a home care company to do that. They can give you additional resources in the actual community. So maybe they think that hospice is appropriate, or at least a conversation that you should be having. They can start that conversation with a hospice company. If you need a person like myself, they would know to call a local person who knows our assisted living communities and our memory cares. Um, they're just going to help navigate your life. Um, I don't really know how else to say it. I mean, they can literally set up a cleaning service for you in your home, or anyway, anything like get a dog walker for you. But they are very, very valuable. They do a lot of emotional coaching. Not therapy per se, but it's kind of like therapy. But that's really all I can say. They're kind of like just this amazing social worker, and they're generally just the nicest people in the world. And they're just going to listen to you, uncover needs, whatever needs you think you want, they will help you with. Whatever needs they think you might have or that you should consider, they're going to suggest.
A related question to that is, how do you get a care manager?
Yeah, that's a great question because a lot of people don't even know how to find people like me. Sometimes it's best to start with your senior center. That's usually the best place to go. You could try to contact a social worker at a hospital or a skilled nursing facility. They're definitely more difficult to get a hold of. Um, if you have a home care company, they'll probably know of a care manager. A home health company, the folks that bring in the physical therapy, occupational speech therapy, they would be able to connect you with one. And then same thing, people like myself, we can help you with that too. But senior centers would probably be your starting point.
Okay, we have several people who are asking questions. Let me unmute you, uh, unmute yourself when you have a question. Let's go to that now. And I'm going to ask you that you stop sharing your screen, Brian, so we can see people. And
Okay.
then Lori McGinnis, if you wouldn't mind asking your question about the hourly and monthly rates.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So early in your presentation, Brian, you mentioned hiring an independent person to come in for home care. And you said that they can often, you can often get them at a pretty reasonable price. And you used $20 a month as an example. And I just wanted to check and see if you meant $20 an hour.
I meant 20, so thank you.
Okay.
Yes. I wish it was $20 a month. Yes.
Right.
Brian, can you do the stop share
So I have this new share, but I'm not seeing a stop share
at
on
the very bottom of your screen? You
Oh,
should.
there it is, the big giant thing in red. How's that?
Okay, great.
Yes. So yeah, good question. So private caregivers, we can see them go as low as $20 per hour. Sometimes we see $25 per hour. Again, private pay. In a situation like that, if you have a long-term care insurance policy, just so you know, your long-term care insurance policy isn't going to work. You would have to be with one of those home care organization companies because they're licensed, they're bonded, and they are insured. Their caregivers have had criminal background checks, and they have a TB shot done every year, and they go through mandatory dementia training every year as well. Okay. That's why they're more expensive. Okay.
Here's a question that Stephen Wood asked. Stephen, would you mind asking this about the Department of Veterans Affairs, etc.? Unless you'd like me to. You need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about the Department of Veteran Affairs benefits again. I'm a veteran, my wife has Parkinson's. And she's totally bedbound, and we have full-time caregivers.
Okay.
I'm wondering, would she qualify in that situation?
So it's a great question. And what county are you in?
Alameda.
You're Alameda. So you would need to contact the VA.
Uh-huh.
So just because people are veterans, it doesn't actually mean they qualify for the benefit. Okay. So you need to call them, and then they have a list of criteria that you have to meet. So they are looking at income and different types of things, but you have to go through them in order to figure that part out.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's a long, it can take quite some time to actually get approved for the benefit. But what you want to know is it's retroactive from the time you actually submitted the paperwork to the VA. Okay, so yeah, there's no guarantees, but they do look at a lot of different things. It took my dad 4 months to actually get approved for it. So,
but it is retroactive.
It is retroactive. Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I assume the VA in Alameda counties, I can find the phone number easily. Just
Yes,
Google it.
or you can call me after this and I can give it to you, or shoot me an email. I'm happy to do that. Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Or if you have a question, simply unmute yourself and ask it. And while people are thinking about what they want to ask, go ahead, Lori.
What's the standard typical rate for a care manager?
That's a good question. I didn't hit on that. So that is, there is a range. They're all a little bit different. So you'd want to try to find maybe one or two, if possible. Sometimes depending on the area, it's difficult to find multiple. Generally, a care manager is approximately $150 per hour. Okay. And then a lot of them actually break that $150 up into like minutes. So like the first 10 minutes. So if you don't need a whole hour, they'll bill you for the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So they all do it differently. Some charge for, the driving time in between, maybe by miles or time. Some get really into the weeds. I'm not a fan and I try to avoid them, but they're kind of like, some of them become kind of like lawyers, if you will. So even if they send you a fax or something, they're going to charge you for that. So those are the type of questions you're going to want to ask. Like, is it just a flat 150, or every time you send me an email and every time you fax something to somebody, like, are you going to be charging me? Okay. But if you just engage them, I'm working with someone right now. I'll give you an example. Husband and wife, they live in Rossmore, Walnut Creek, and the wife requires quite a bit of care. And when the care manager got involved, she noticed that the husband was just he was losing himself through the journey. So she ended up engaging her going to an adult daycare program in Orinda. So she set all of that up. And then she has transportation now for her to go back and forth. So really all she did was come in, assess the situation, and say, here's what we should be doing now. And let's see how long we can make this work. So it has worked for a very long time. I think, I want to say almost 2 years. But it's gotten to the point now where he's starting to decline just a little bit. Okay. So she actually engaged me because he's a very bright person. But when he's with her, he can't get out to do anything anymore because he's the caregiver. Right. So she engaged me. So I went over and I met with both of them, and they will be transitioning into an assisted living community in a couple of weeks. Okay. You know what? Speaking of that, let me tell you one other thing about assisted living. I know it's not care management, but this is another thing you have to be careful of. Okay. I think if you remember, I said they're all licensed differently, but what people don't know is some of our communities, just because maybe someone, for example, has a dementia diagnosis, there are some communities that try to pigeonhole those individuals into a memory care. But why? Just because you have dementia doesn't mean you need a memory care, right? You can be extremely high functioning. I've actually pulled people out of memory cares. So what I want you to know, though, is there are some buildings that are licensed and they allow happily for residents with dementia to be in assisted living. As long as the person's not combative, they're not trying to elope, exit from the building, they're not wandering around. Those are the kinds of communities that you want to work with, right? Some have policies where if someone is in their memory care and the husband or wife is in assisted living, or even if the husband and wife were to come and visit, they don't allow the resident in memory care to come out into the common areas and independent and assisted living. To me, it's kind of a red flag. I love the communities that encourage that. Maybe there's an activity going on or there's some music going on. They encourage the resident to come out as long as they're supervised by either a caregiver or a family member. But those are the little things that I want people to think about. If I'm working with a heavier person, some of our communities are not licensed to do what we call a two-person assist. So basically, two people helping someone up out of a chair or bed, or utilize a Hoyer. The Hoyer is the device to get them out of bed into a wheelchair. So sometimes those people actually have to move to different communities. And this is the kicker of it. So there are some communities out there who are not licensed to do a puree diet, and to even feed a resident. I mean, how does that happen in a memory care? So in situations like that, they have to move to different communities, memory cares that are licensed to manage that level of care. So there's a lot of things to know on the back end about these communities. Just like with the home care companies, there's a lot of things that you need to know. And even with the home care companies, so we have the private caregivers, we have the home care organizations, but at the end of the day, what you need to know is we have a caregiver shortage. And when you engage a home care company, typically they have a 4-hour minimum requirement. But because our caregiver shortage is so bad right now, sometimes the caregivers aren't showing up. And most of our caregivers, they work for multiple agencies. And that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. The bad part of it is that just like anyone, they need money, right? So let's say they work for one agency who offered them a 4-hour shift. But an hour before that shift happened, the other agency called and offered them an 8-hour shift. Trust me, they're going to take that 8-hour shift and they're going to cancel that first one.
Mhm.
And that home care company will be scrambling to find a caregiver. Okay. But right down to the private caregiver, yes, they are more affordable. It comes with some liability. But I want you, if that's the journey you go down, what is your plan if that individual gets sick and they don't show up? What is your backup plan? Okay. So little things that you want to think about. Okay.
One of the things, Brian, that you had previously talked about, either in person with me or in this presentation, was the way in which you go and walk with people through these different facilities. So can you couple that with an explanation of how is it that you personally then get paid?
Yes. So our process with the referral agents, the local ones that are still what I call doing it old school, is the goal is to go meet with the individual. So in the hospital, skilled nursing facility, I love it if I can go into their home, because then I can actually look around and say, what community might be a good fit? Like what resident population might fit this person? Okay. So then we tour, let's say you're like, oh my gosh, this is the right community. I want to move forward with it. The communities pay our agency, all agencies, a referral fee. So you don't pay us anything. It's the communities that do. Okay. And we're licensed to work, not licensed, but we can work with any and all of these places. And then we have no ownership or affiliation with them. We're all of us are independent contractors. Okay.
The Parkinson Network of Mount Diablo has an upcoming, it's going to launch its respite care program. And its respite care program deals with this statistic that you talked about earlier, which is 60% of care partners typically pass before the person with Parkinson's because they're under a great deal of stress. And we're figuring out how to best deal with that. And so in our grant program, which will launch May 1st for members of PNMD, people will be able to get caregivers from licensed agencies for a total of 12 hours of care. And so maybe that will break the stranglehold that a person has on themselves to say, I can't take a break. Caregivers need to learn to take a break too. Can you speak a bit more about that?
I mean, sometimes when I work with my families, let's say that we have home care around the clock. Sometimes, like in my personal situation, we'll do a transition into a community where they're getting care. Maybe it's less expensive. 9 times, there's always a sense of hurt or maybe even guilt associated with that when they do the transition. But 9 times out of 10, they say, I wish I would have done this earlier. Their loved one's getting good care, but they're finally able to take care of themselves. I see people losing weight. I get the phone calls all the time with family members. They're just stressed out. It's not taking care. It's hard to sometimes even recognize what I have found is a lot of my parents' generation, they don't necessarily like to tell the truth. So when the kids call, they're like, oh yeah, everything's hunky dory. I'm like, oh man, I don't think so. It's like, you sound a little stressed out. You looked a little thinner the last time I was there. But you have to do something. If you can bring in care for even just 4 hours a day, once a week, so you can go hike, or go for a walk, go get your hair done, go meet with your friends, you have to do it. You are shortening your life if you don't have that in place. You have to have some type of plan in place.
All right, folks, it's open to questions from you. So if you have a question or a concern, or you want something reviewed, this is a good time to ask. Just remember to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
And when
Go ahead, Beth.
Go ahead.
I have a question about hospice. You mentioned that 2 doctors have to recommend hospice. What 2 doctors is it that recommended? And how do you get that recommendation? Do you have to ask for it, or do they supply it on their own from what
They'll
they
supply it on their own. Yeah, you would just go through your primary care physician.
The second doctor that would
I
recommend
think
it?
it probably will end up being the hospice doctor.
They connect with the hospice doctor and say, I think this should happen, and then the hospice doctor approves it. I see.
Excellent. More questions, folks.
You know what? And Beth actually just made me think of something. I want you to know, if you go to a hospital or if you go to a skilled nursing facility, you have rights. Sometimes what we have found in our skilled nursing facilities and hospice companies, they like to say, hey, here's the agency that we want you to use. And they don't give you choices. You are supposed to be given choices. But if you have a company in mind for hospice, for home care, for home health, people like me, you let them know that that's what you want. The only reason why I'm saying that is that sometimes in these hospitals or skilled nursings, they may have family members who own these hospice companies or home care companies, right? So just be careful. You know, if your neighbor had a good experience with a certain home care company and you want to use them, just make sure, you know, that everyone is on the same page. They can't tell you what to do. Something else I wanted to share is that right now, I was telling you that we have this caregiver shortage. It's happening in our hospitals. We have a nursing shortage, but it's also happening in our skilled nursing facilities. So you have to, if you have to go to one, just know that right now, it's not their fault. It's not that they want it to be this way, but the care is kind of lacking, especially at nighttime. So you will have to advocate for yourself as much as possible. Or if your loved one is in there, you have to be there advocating for them constantly. Okay. So you have to be the squeaky wheel.
Now, you said there's a county agency in Contra Costa. I imagine there's also one in Alameda that people would go to. What are the 2 agencies that they would go to, depending on their county, for financial assistance or home care
Home
assistance.
care, yeah. It's called in-home supportive services. So IHSS. Every county, I believe, has their own. So you could do a Google for in-home supportive services, Alameda County. The number will pop up. Okay. So those caregivers, I believe they're licensed, bonded, and insured. The difference is, I think you actually have to call and interview the caregivers on your own. There's more work involved in that process, but it can be done and successfully. And I think I shared hospice is covered by Medicare. They supply you with a hospital bed, depends, ensure, maybe a bedside commode, chucks, and gloves. So that's a Medicare benefit. The home health, again, the physical therapy, occupational speech, that's a Medicare benefit. And then home care, private pay, unless you have long-term care insurance or are a veteran. And then again, care manager is private pay, but some long-term care insurance policies cover that. The tricky thing is with these long-term care insurance policies is you have got to call them. They all cover different things. So some may cover home care, but they don't cover assisted living. Some may cover your care, but only if you're in a skilled nursing facility. So in some ways, and I hate to say this, you need to have two of those activities of daily living in order to qualify to get your benefit. So, bathing, toileting, grooming, medication management, all those fun things. But their goal is they send out a nurse or a social worker and they assess you before you actually get this benefit. So in some ways, I feel like, they're kind of doing everything in their power to deny you of a benefit because, it's more or less an insurance company. So be careful of that. A lot of them have what we call a 90-day wait period. So you may think, oh my gosh, I have long-term care insurance. This is great. And it is great, but your benefit won't kick in for 90 days. So it's a 90-day wait period. A lot of the folks don't know that until they start the policy. Okay.
Or are there any other questions? Feel free to ask whatever you want. And Bryan here provides a wealth of information.
Yeah, I sometimes feel when I do this presentation, I give too much information, and maybe it's more confusing than anything else. But you'll have my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me, phone call, email me, whatever's most comfortable. We can set up a time to talk and have a conversation. If it's a resource that you want to see if I can find for you, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay.
Can you again share the last slide in your presentation, Bryan?
Yeah. So share screen.
I'm going to spotlight you again. Let's give people a couple of minutes to copy down that information before we end the presentation.
Sounds good.
So you have to share your screen again.
It's not sharing right now. All right, let me see. Share screen.
Yes,
You guys see me now?
I see you, but not the share screen.
Share.
There, it's coming up. Now go back to the slideshow and do it.
In mine, it's not coming up. It says that I'm sharing it, but I'm not seeing it. Here we are. All right. Rick is savvy with this stuff. I'm not. So hold on, guys. All right. Can you all see that? Is that viewable?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Almost done. So for those of you that can't see, that's Bryan Riddle, 925-518-4946. And you can reach him at brian@careplacementadvisors.com. By the way, when we post this video online of this presentation, Brian's contact information will be in the YouTube description.